Welcome to Creation Care 101. So wonderful to see you. Oh my goodness, so many folks. Lots of
welcome everybody.
Familiar faces and new faces. Welcome, welcome to session 1 of Creation Care 101. Welcome. Let's see here. Goodness. Hi, Amy. Welcome, Kathy, and Katharine, and Sue, and Bill. Lovely to see you all. Hello, Linda and Maureen. Hi, Grace. Oh, Grace. Hi, Mickey. Hi, Leslie. Rachel. James. Goodness, so wonderful to see you all. Hope you're all having a wonderful evening as we're just waiting for folks to arrive. Hi, Barbara. Hi again, Wynn. And hi, Eric and Stephanie. Hi, Rachel. Goodness, so wonderful to see some familiar faces, some new faces. We are so glad you're here. Please do connect with one another in chat. Thank you for getting us started, Amy. Just put your name, where you're from, and in 2 or 3 words, just how you're doing right now. If you want to share, are you excited, tired, hopeful, curious, all of the above? Great to see you all. Goodness. Wow. Got from Texas. The session earlier, there were folks and churches from all over the country, and that is the same in this session as well tonight. So, hi, Kathy and Kim and Eric. Goodness, and Stephanie. So many. Hi, Loretta. Oh, it's so wonderful to see you all. So please continue to just put your name and where you're from in the chat. Hi, Carla. And again, welcome to Creation Care 101. This is an incredible list of all the churches with us in this fall program. We are welcoming over 100 churches from across the country, across 10 denominations. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you're already doing. Thank you for, if you are just curious and just getting started in finding out about some things, that is fantastic. We are so thrilled to welcome over 100 churches across the country, from coast to coast, from north to south and east to west, all across the country.
Absolutely.
So excited to see everyone. And folks are still coming in. Welcome, welcome. And we are going to move on to going into a plan for our time tonight, so that we can just really honor time. We will run about 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And then Russ and I will be staying after for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so, to just available to answer any other questions you may have, additional questions or feedback you'd like to share. But the session tonight will run about 90 minutes. And also just a general plan for our time. We've done the welcome, and we will have just a prayer just to ground us in this evening, and then some short introductions, a brief program overview. We will go into a time of education, and then I'll break out into some breakout rooms for conversation, and then the ever important implementation section. So we will be moving through things tonight. Also, as much as possible, we just want you to feel at home in this space. So a few hospitality notes. We will be recording tonight. And with the exception of when you're in the breakout rooms, we will not be recording. So we are recording so that it can be shared with those who aren't able to attend tonight. So we also will be monitoring the chat for questions that may pop up or things you'd like to share. Also, please know you don't have to take notes tonight, unless you really, really want to, as we are emailing you next week a recording of this session that you will be able to start and stop as you desire to review anything or share it with other folks. And as well, we'll send you next week an email summary of links and resources and tools, very summarized and quick. So welcome to the folks that are coming in right now. Also,
let's go ahead and move to the next.
Yeah, we're going to move on to ground as a time of prayer, and then we will go on from there. So this is a quote from Terry Tempest Williams' book. And just to let us arrive and ground in a time of prayer. So let us pray. God, oh goodness, we thank you for this opportunity gathered here, and for this community gathered here, and for all the places we are in and those surrounding us. Be with us as we continue to learn and journey together in living out our faith with courage and love and hope, while at the same time truly caring for each other and our neighbors and creation. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you again for each and every person that's here. This is a wonderful time to gather together. And the first thing we just want to share is just a little bit about our advisors. As many of you know, over the last 30 years, incredible, crucial work has been done in religion and science on creation care for our common home by many folks, by folks such as Yale's Forum on Religion and Ecology, Oxford University's Laudato Si Institute, Earth Charter, Catholic Climate Covenant, Interfaith Power and Light, Blessed Tomorrow, and so many other countless individuals and organizations working in creation care, like so many of you already have been and are. And without all of this past work and current work, we couldn't even have imagined a holistic approach program like Creation Care 101. It just would not have been possible. So we are very, very grateful. And we can definitely not overstate our gratitude to you and your colleagues, and to all of you who have already done and continue to do so much. And for all those of you who are just leaning into this for the first time and are just curious, we are all on this journey together. Moving on to some brief introductions. Russ, if you want to give away. Hello. That's Russ and I. We are first and foremost husband and wife and family, and secondly, co-directors and founders of the Creation Care Collective and the Creation Care 101 program. We have spent the last 20 years working with over 120,000 churches across denominations, and our daughter Kaylee, who you also see here, she is also a founder, and she is currently at Yale doing a joint master's at the Divinity School and the School of the Environment. And so tonight, Russ and I are your co-hosts, and we'll be hosting and facilitating our session today. And so I am going to turn it over to Russ, and he's going to give us a quick overview of the program.
Excellent. Thank you, Becky. And so we're going to just zoom out and take a look at the broad scope of the entire program for just a couple minutes, and then we'll jump right into the material for tonight. So the Creation Care 101 program connects the dots between faith, science, creation care, and environmental justice. The program's free for churches. It welcomes people from all parts of the Christian family. And as Becky mentioned earlier, we're really excited to have 10 denominations represented in the fall program. Together, we'll be going on this journey and engaging in faith-based conversations with a solutions focus. And all of this done in the context of how can we respond in our churches and homes. As always, we're working towards bridging creation care and the work that we do in creation care to the church's mission of equity, justice, and love. this funnel that we kind of see on the left-hand side of the screen here, really as we were working to pull this program together, the funnel really just kind of was a guiding image for us. And as we worked with all of our advisors and started gathering and analyzing and looking at the solutions that are available and the recommendations that are available for churches and our homes, we quickly realized that there were over 200 solutions that people could do at church and home and in different programs. And we realized that was a lot, and it was a lot to sort through. So we asked the question, well, how do we actually choose? What can we sort out? And we put together a group of criteria. The first one is we were looking for solutions that actually are consistent with the values of our faith. We looked for solutions that have a scientific basis, that they actually make a difference and that we can measure those differences. There are a tremendous number of environmental programs and solutions, but we're particularly looking at things that are scaled for the church and home. So we probably won't talk about, offshore wind farms, for example. That's something scaled for a national level, but we're really focused in on churches and homes. And we realize that people that are working in churches often are busy, often wearing multiple hats. And so we wanted to make these solutions accessible and implementable for the church. And finally, we were looking for things that are available now. These are all solutions. Everything we talk about in this program are things that we can actually implement and do now. As we took those 200 solutions out of our review of material and put them through the funnel and applied those criteria, 7 different topics really fell out of that process. And those are organized into education, food, the ways that we gather, purchasing, waste, water and energy, and finally garden. And we took those 7 categories of solutions and put them together into the Creation Care 101 program. And that's what we are starting to go through tonight. Each of those general categories of solutions we're actually going to cover in an individual session. And tonight is kind of an introduction. We're setting the table, building a common framework to talk about environmental issues in the church. And at any rate, we're glad that you're here. One last bit before we move on. Implementation is a core part. We talk about being focused on solutions, and implementation is a core part of that. We realize that as you're actually doing work in the church, that it's important that we provide implementation tools to make that possible and simple. So these might look like things like meeting outlines to actually hold a meeting in your church. They might be budgeting tools or analysis of how much money we might save if we did this project, and templates to help you in making presentations to whoever that might be, a vestry or a committee that's analyzing what we're doing. And then finally, each of the solutions that we present has a very curated list of resources to make those things possible. We then took that same approach and said, okay, how can we do this in our homes? And we also looked for those crossover points in how the work that we do in creation care can help support our outreach ministries and our justice ministries. So that's a quick overview of the scope of the program. We're going to now narrow into the very first session. So welcome to session 1 officially. This is Faith, Science, and Creation Care, an introduction. And to get started, I wanted you to think about, these are a couple of big ideas that we're trying to cover in the session. So we're not going to talk about these right now. These are just teeing them up so you can look for them as we go along. The first one is this idea that the biggest impact that we make as a church might just be the change that we inspire in other people. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are the same thing. We'll see that in a couple of the presentations in a little bit. And then there's this idea that small changes sustained over time, done by groups of people, can really have big impacts. And we're going to see some examples of that as well. As always, we're looking at solutions that exist, and there are a lot of solutions in place. And we want to always approach this with a sense of hope. So I'm going to turn this over to Becky. She's going to do the introduction for the first teaching part of tonight. We're going to go through this and then break out into some discussion groups. So Becky,
Yes.
go ahead.
Thank you so much, Russ. That was fantastic. Yes, we are going to move into some education. In each session of the Creation Care 101 program, the education section will look and feel a little bit different. Our goal is not to recreate the wheel, but to connect you all to experts in these fields of faith, science, and solutions by weaving the materials into narrative and accessible and applicable forms. Then we will lead you into breakout rooms for, like Russ said, some small discussion groups. And then we will then be moving on to the second session of the education and then the implementation. So we will begin today by grounding in our faith with the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Michael Curry, and an overview of Pope Francis's Laudato Si, and then have a combination of faith and science perspectives with part of a keynote address, A Climate of Hope by Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. And Dr. Katharine Hayhoe is an internationally respected climate scientist who has spoken all over the world and also co-authored a book with her husband, who is a pastor, titled A Climate for Change, Global Warming Facts for Faith-Based Decisions. So let's get started with Bishop Michael Curry.
All of God's creation is a part of the very family of God, the entire created world and universe. We see the beauty and the majesty that God has created. We have been charged with being caretakers of God's creation, and in so doing to be co-workers with God in the saving work of restoration and reconciliation. If you don't believe me, read Genesis 1. The work we do for the healing of creation is simply joining in God's saving work. This is not secular do-goodism. This is the Jesus movement. As followers of Jesus, we care for God's world because God cares for God's world. God's work goes on. Our work must go forward too. This is God's world. We are God's children, and He's got the whole world in His hands. May God bless our hands as we strive to be faithful in this holy and important work.
Pope Francis has written a letter addressed to every person on this planet, urging us all to protect the Earth, our common home. In the letter, he says, "The Earth is God's gift to us, full of beauty and wonder, where the fruits of the earth belong to everyone. But what we see today is that our common home has never been so hurt and mistreated as it has been in the last 200 years. We have developed at a greater speed than we could ever have imagined. We have treated the Earth like it has an unlimited supply of resources, taking more than our fair share from most people on the planet, as well as future generations to come. We have stripped the Earth of its natural forests, contaminated the Earth's waters, its land, and its air. Plants and species are becoming extinct at an alarming rate. The Earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. Our increasing use of polluting fossil fuels, especially coal, oil, and gas, is helping to drive climate change, which is one of the biggest challenges we face today. Climate change affects us all, but it is the poorest communities who suffer the most. The whole human family needs to work together so that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Our use of polluting fossil fuels also needs to be replaced without delay. And we need to stop treating the world's resources as an object for profit, with no thought on how our actions might affect the environment or future generations. So let's put love for the world and love for our neighbour into action. Let's undergo an eco-conversion in which we listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. This means taking seriously things like avoiding the use of plastic and paper, reducing water waste, separating rubbish, and using public transport as a part of our calling to protect creation. But more urgently, we need to slow down on how much we consume and throw away. We can find great joy and freedom in living simply, rather than always on the lookout for what we do not have. We are capable of these changes and making a new start. So let us make that start today. Signed, Pope Francis. Laudato Si, a letter from Pope Francis on care for our common home.
But the last one on this list that I want to talk about is the one that is nearest and dearest to my heart, and it's the topic of tonight. It's the idea that our faith or God or our spirituality gives us hope. Well, people might say, but why do you need that? We have the science, and we absolutely do. What the science does is it can tell us. It can tell us what is happening to our world. It can tell us the new records that are being broken, whether for global temperature, Greenland ice melt, hurricane intensification, heavy rainfall, or devastating heat waves. And it can document not only how climate is changing, but why. For the first time ever, humans are responsible. And we can go even further. We can quantify the implications of our choices. So we can say, if we choose to do this, here's what's going to happen. If we make this other choice, here's what's going to happen. Science can do this, but science cannot tell us the right decision to make. That is where what's in our heart comes into the equation, our values. And for those of us who fall into that 50% or 70% category, a lot of our values are informed by our faith. There's a wide range of views on this home that we inhabit that range from worshiping it to treating it like garbage. But most of us instinctively feel that we fall in the middle. We don't really fall at either extreme. And we understand that without the air that we breathe, without the water that we drink, without the food that we eat, without the safe places that we live that are provided by this planet, we would not be here. We are designed to live on this planet. It supplies the beauty of nature as well that feeds our souls, not just our bodies. And as Christians, we believe that the Bible says God made human beings in his image for a reason. That reason being to be responsible for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. Rather than being given a piece of land and letting it decay and extracting every piece of value that we can from it, we believe that we are to be caretakers, to be gardeners, to be stewards, to have responsibility. And this is where the whole concept of creation care comes from. But this concept is still incomplete because we are living things too. And when we look at the impacts of a changing climate and who is most vulnerable to those impacts, we see that the people who are most vulnerable are the ones who have done the least to contribute to the problem. The people who are already hungry, the people who already do not have clean water to drink, the people who are already dying from diseases that nobody should be dying from. Climate change is, as the US military calls it, a threat multiplier. It's the hole in the bucket. It is not just an environmental issue. It is not just a science issue. Climate change is a health issue. It's an economic issue. It's a poverty issue, a hunger issue, a justice issue. It's an everything issue, and it connects directly to what we believe. As they say in Texas, where they print the Bible on road signs, that love thy neighbor thing, I meant it, signed God. So why do we care? The reason we care about this is because of who we already are. Who are you? Are you a parent, a sister, a brother, a child? Are you a scientist, an advocate, a person of faith? Are you a hiker, a birder, a Rotarian? Who are you? Whoever you are, you're the perfect person to care. And the reason you care about climate change is because of who you are. So who I am then in turn informs not only why I care, but it informs what I think I should do about it. And that, again, is where our head meets our heart. So as a Christian, the verse that means the most to me about what we're supposed to do about it is this one. It comes from the book of Timothy, where the Apostle Paul is talking to Timothy, and he says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. When we hear people talk about climate change these days, fear is the overriding emotion. Fear that ending our use of fossil fuels will devastate the economy and ruin our lives. Fear that if we don't, it will devastate the economy and ruin our lives. Fear of this person getting control or that person doing that. Fear is what drives so much of our conversation today. But we're told, we're given a litmus test, that the spirit of fear is not how we're supposed to operate. We're supposed to operate with three amazing things. A spirit of power. What is power? Power is the ability to act, not be paralyzed by fear, but the ability to be empowered to act. How? Out of love and compassion for others, and, as a scientist, this is my favorite part, with a sound mind to make good decisions based on facts and data. So what gives me hope? Everything on this list gives me hope, but if I had to pick one, it's the thing that is nearest and dearest to my heart, and that is the fact that I am a person of faith. And my attitudes towards my child and other children, my attitudes towards my fellow advocates and organizations, technology, innovation, and education, all comes from that same foundation of being responsible and caring for others. So how do we spread this hope? How do we spread it is right there. It's the next thing on the list, by talking about it. When they asked me to do a TED Talk that was released a year ago this week, they said, what do you want to do it on? And I said, I want to do it on the most important thing we can do about climate change. And they said, well, we already have TED Talks on light bulbs. I said, no. I want to do it about talking. How does talking give us hope? Not talking about all the depressing science, talking about why it matters to us in the places where we live and what we can do to fix it. Because when I asked you what gives us hope, what was the common denominator in your answer? People. How do we engage with people? By talking. By engaging with each other as human beings, by looking at each other eye to eye, by rejoicing in what we share, by respecting what we differ on, by talking together about how we could head into that better future, that is where we find our hope. And for me, hope is a bit of a reverse emotion. Because to end with one final verse that means a lot to me personally, again from the book of Romans, it says, hope comes from somewhere that we don't intuitively expect. Suffering begins with suffering. Suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character. Character produces hope, and the hope does not disappoint, as other verses say. The hope does not disappoint because of why? Because of love. So no matter who we are, no matter what we believe, the only thing that counts is when our faith expresses itself through love. And I want to conclude with one story of a colleague who sought me out for lunch at a scientific meeting a few years ago. I wasn't working with him at the time. I knew him, but I was a little bit puzzled as to why he wanted to have lunch, and he didn't tell me why. So we sat down at the table together, and before I had even hardly sat down, he leaned across the table and he said, I'm a humanist, but I care too. And I said, well, of course you do. He said, I care about people. The reason I do climate science is because it affects people. And it disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable people in the world, and that is not fair. And so that is why I do the work I do, and that is why I'm so concerned about climate solutions as well, because I care about people. And I said, yes, that's the reason we all care. And we all care because of who we are. Who we are does not have to be the same. Our differences are what make us strong. So whoever you are, whatever you believe in, the only thing that counts is when what you believe in expresses itself through love, and that is the path forward to hope, and that is the path to fixing this thing. Thank you.
Goodness.
Right.
Thank you for hanging in through those, and we hope that those were meaningful. We're very thankful for Bishop Michael Curry and Pope Francis and Katharine Hayhoe and their talks, and we are going to, there's a lot to take in, and we're going to head into our first of our breakout rooms tonight for just some small group discussion. And then we'll come back together and briefly share some meaningful takeaways before heading into the second half of the education science, and then right into implementation. So first of all, though, before we go into breakout rooms, we do want to raise up some community guidelines. We need your help to keep the Creation Care 101 program as meaningful, engaging, and mutually honoring as possible. So our community guidelines are to be present, to, of course, speak kindly, to listen deeply and share generously. There's so much we can learn from one another, to honor all voices, and to be open-hearted, of course. So we are going to be we have put the breakout room questions. They have been dropped in the chat. And you'll want to copy these questions real quick before we head into our breakout rooms. And then we'll have about 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, and you can look, and once you're in the breakout room, look at the top right-hand corner, and you will see an ongoing timer to kind of be able to see where we are in the time in the breakout room. And then after 10 minutes, we will be coming back together and just share a few meaningful takeaways before heading into our next session. So enjoy starting to meet one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one final note, if anybody is uncomfortable in a small group setting, or you'd prefer not to do that, you can just leave the room and it'll put you back in the general session. And generally I'll be there in the general session as well to do things. So with that, I'm going to send us all off to the breakout rooms. And
yes.
Here we go.
See you on the other side of the talking tunnels, as it has been called.
Yes. Welcome back through the talking tunnel, as Becky likes to call it. So, we're so glad that you guys all made it back.
Mute here. Yes, welcome back. Waiting for everyone to get back. I think most folks are back. I hope that was short but some meaningful time. We do want to just take a few minutes to create some space to hear a few of some of the meaningful takeaways or highlights that came up. For folks, we probably have time for 2 or 3 folks to share just briefly.
Maybe 1 or 2.
Oh, maybe 1 or 2. Okay, as Russ said. Okay.
Let me stop sharing my screen so we can do that. There we go.
Okay, so if you want to just raise a hand and unmute, we do have time for just 1 or 2 folks to share. There was
Sue, go ahead.
Came up.
Yeah, we had a really quick but interesting discussion about, so I live in San Diego, how the population in Tijuana has a sewage treatment plant that's just overwhelmed, and the Tijuana River flows into San Diego and pollutes our beaches. So it looks like that Tijuana is the problem, and we're being damaged. But the reality that was pointed out in our conversation was, what is it that we Americans, or we San Diegans, created that forced Tijuana to be so big that it's growing faster than it can keep up with its infrastructure? You know, is it because we want that cheap t-shirt that is made there? Is it because, you know, well, during Prohibition, that's why Tijuana grew, because you could go there to drink, and all Americans went there to drink. So there's so it's always back and forth and back and forth. There's always, you know, it's a big giant circle, and that's what we decided.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have something quick we can share?
Insight on that. Probably time for 1 more. Anyone else want to share?
No. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
okay.
Then we'll go ahead and keep moving, and just so we can honor our time.
Absolutely. So we are going to get ready to go into our second part of education, more on the science side. We've done some grounding in our faith, and now we are going to get our arms around some summarized science by looking at Project Drawdown with Dr. Elizabeth Bagley, who's being interviewed by Kaylee. And Elizabeth has an interdisciplinary background that spans academia and business and the nonprofit sector and science. And Elizabeth led Drawdown Learn at Project Drawdown, where she produced climate solution talks. And so as we lean into solutions to as well, it's going to be very helpful. And then we will have a case study by Russ, it's really simplifying and setting the context for us and preparing us for implementation. So a very valuable part of the session. Then we will head into our second breakout room discussions, and there will be a little more time.
There you go.
And before we head into implementation. So I'm going to turn it over to...
We are so glad to be with you today. Dr. Elizabeth Bagley, thank you. And I would invite you now to share with us your presentation on Project Drawdown.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Kaylee, and people of faith. It is an absolute privilege to be with you today. And I'm going to start by asking us to think about a particular question. And here it is, folks. I would love to ask you, what comes to mind when you think of climate change and global warming? So go ahead and think about what kinds of words, what kinds of feelings, what kinds of emotions flood in when you think of climate change and global warming. Now, this question is not unique to me. It's actually a question that was asked to 14,000 people around the world. And when those people were asked this question, here's what we heard. 44% of those 14,000 people, they mentioned the outcomes of climate change, things like changing weather, melting ice caps. So that's almost half of the people talked about outcomes. 18% of the people said that they think about the causes of climate change, things like the burning of fossil fuels for coal, oil, like coal, oil, and natural gas. So we've got 44% with outcomes, 18% of causes. And here's where I think it gets really interesting. Only 3% of those 14,000 people around the world mentioned anything about solutions when they think about climate change and global warming. So everybody, here is where I would like to invite you into this incredible opportunity space. This is a space where we can really start a conversation about climate solutions so that we can work together in our homes, in our faith communities, and beyond to put climate solutions into action. So my hope is that as part of this program and as part of your learning about climate solutions, you'll be inspired to put them into action. And when you're asked next, what comes to mind when you think about climate change and global warming, solutions will be top of mind. But you might be wondering, well, what are the solutions to climate change? Well, everybody, I've got them for you. These solutions, this is a visual of a poster that we have at the organization I work for. And this poster has shows a whole bunch of the solutions that we have researched over the years. I am with Project Drawdown. We are the world's leading resource for climate solutions. And if you're interested in finding out more about the solutions, the research behind them, and people who are putting them into action all over the world, I invite you to check out our website, drawdown.org, where we have this publication. The latest publication is called the Drawdown Review. It came out in early 2020. It's in English, French, and Spanish. And in this publication, we look at the science behind the climate solutions. And the reason we're looking at the science behind the solutions is because we want to reach something called drawdown. And you might be wondering, well, what in the world is that weird word, drawdown? Well, drawdown actually comes from a scientific term. And that scientific term indicates this blue point, the future point in time, when levels of those heat trapping gases that we see increasing over time, those heat trapping gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and start to steadily decline. This moment of drawdown is a crucial turning point for life, and it's one that we need to reach as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. But you might be wondering, well, how do we get there? How do we achieve drawdown? Well, that's where our climate equation comes in handy. So hang with me for a second and imagine that this gray rectangle that's labeled the atmosphere contains all of those heat trapping gases that humans put into the atmosphere every year. Well, one part of the equation is understanding where those heat trapping gases are coming from. And everybody, we know where they come from. So these are global numbers. So we're looking at the sources of the global sources of greenhouse gas emissions, otherwise known as heat trapping gases, into the atmosphere every year. So about 25% of the sources of those heat trapping gases come from electricity production. Another 24%, almost another quarter, come from food, agriculture, and land use. 21% from industry, 14% from transportation, 6% from buildings, and 10% from other energy-related emissions. This is great. We know we can identify the sources of those heat-trapping gases, but thankfully, the story doesn't end there. That's where nature does us an enormous favor and removes about 40% of those heat-trapping gases from the atmosphere. This is nature all by itself doing what it does best with the land sinks and coastal and ocean sinks. But about 60% of those heat trapping gases are left behind in the atmosphere. And that's what's creating that thick blanket around the planet. So now we know where the heat trapping gases come from. We know where they go. And that's what helps us identify the suite of climate solutions that we can all implement to help reach drawdown. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to think about the 3 S's. So the first S is sources. We want to reduce those sources. You'll recognize these as the sources going into the atmosphere, right? We want to make sure that we're reducing the sources related to electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, buildings, and transportation. We also, though, want to think about the second S, which is sinks. So we have sources, we have sinks, and we want to support and enhance the sinks of carbon dioxide found in nature. And the third S, we have sources, sinks. The third is society. We want to help society achieve broader transformations. This, everybody, this is the Drawdown framework for climate solutions. These are the 3 interconnected areas for action that we need to pursue globally, simultaneously, and with determination. I want you to be thinking about where you can plug in, right? Where are the sources, the sinks, and the societal solutions that make sense for your community of faith, for your broader community? Because these solutions that we talk about at drawdown.org are not solutions further down the road. They are solutions that we have in hand today that help us reach drawdown and really begin to come back into balance with the planet's living systems. These solutions are tools of possibility in the face of a seemingly impossible challenge. And people and institutions of all kinds in all places have roles to play in this great transformation. And the solutions that we discussed today are a synthesis, a collection of collective wisdom and collective action that are unfolding across the globe. So beyond addressing just heat trapping gases, climate solutions can have co-benefits that contribute to a better, more equitable world. For example, those that curb air pollution are also health solutions. This is an image of a clean cook stove. Others that protect and restore ecosystems are also biodiversity solutions. Many climate solutions create jobs, they foster resilience to climate impacts like storms and droughts, and they bring other environmental benefits like safeguarding water resources. And we know that the poorest and the most vulnerable among us, those who have done the least to contribute to the problem, are the most affected. These include women and children, farmers struggling to raise their crops, coastal residents losing their land to sea level rise and erosion, and indigenous peoples in the Arctic whose traditions are threatened and whose homes are being displaced by rising seas and thawing permafrost. We know it takes intention, care, and courage to move solutions forward in ways that heal rather than deepen systemic injustices. And we all have the opportunity and the obligation to co-create systems that are safe and equitable, ensuring that both people and the planet can thrive together. So my question to you is, what can you do? Widespread awareness and understanding of climate solutions is vital to kindle agency and effect change worldwide. Thank you for being part of this program and for finding ways that both you and your faith community can be part of this great transformation. It's such a pleasure being with you.
Thank you, and welcome back, everybody. And that was just, I know that was a lot. So first of all, can we just acknowledge that there was a lot to digest in there? A couple of notes. We are recording the session. You will get a link to a recording of the session. You can stop and play back or fast forward to the parts you want to re-listen to. So all of that is coming next week. And we also, for all of the video teaching that we're doing, we also provide links to the source material. So if you want to take a deeper look into that material, that's available for you as well. Before we leave this kind of time of talking about the climate and everything that we're doing, I just want to take a second to set the context, just so we have a shared understanding, a shared place to start from, and some things to talk about in our next discussion session. So we're going to just talk for a few minutes about this question of what's really going on, what's happening. And I thought, because we've seen so many of the climate infographics and memes and environmental impact statistics, all those things, I thought we'd look at it from the context of what's changed in, well, my lifetime. I'm a little over 50 years, so 50 years old. So what's changed in the last 50 years? So with that, we'll get started. So first, let's think about people. In the United States, back in 1970, or about 50 years ago, there were 205 million people living in the country. Just 50 years later, we've increased that by 125 million people to 330 total. So that's a 60% increase just in my lifetime. We've seen several of the speakers mention spending that came up in the Laudato Si thing, Laudato Si summary. So back in 1970, we spent an average of $17,000 per person. In 2020, that's jumped all the way up to $47,000 per person. That's the average per person for the whole country. And we matched these or we adjusted these for inflation. So these are like dollars to like dollars, taking inflation into account over all those years. As you can imagine, if we look at waste, back in 1970, we generated 1,100 pounds of waste per person per year. By 2020, that had jumped all the way up to 1,800 pounds per person. All that extra spending that we're doing, a lot of that translates into trash, and that's a 54% increase. And even though we've been working on climate and CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas controls, all of that, back in 1970, we were emitting 4.3 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. By 2020, that is still increasing. We're above 1970 levels by about 9%. So even with all the work that we've already done as a country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it's still going up. And part of that is because there's more of us. So we are making some progress, but it's not going nearly quickly enough. So when we think about how the United States compares to the rest of the world and our impact compared to the rest of the world, population-wise, we have about 5% of the world's population. But when we think about resources, for example, paper, we use about 1/3 of the paper in the world. You might consider some of the natural resources like oil and other minerals. We use about 25% of those resources in the world. And waste, we generate almost half of the waste for the entire planet comes from the United States, with just 5% of the population. All of this adds up to greenhouse gas emissions. Cumulatively, with just 5% of the population, again, we account for 24% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So if everybody lived the way that we do in the United States, we estimate that you'd need 5 planets to actually house and take care of all of the things that we buy, the trash that we generate, the resources that we use. So I know that is a lot of information to kind of digest as well. And just as a quick summary, there's a lot more of us. Yes, there is, as soon as this comes up. There we go. We're spending a lot more, and we're generating a lot more trash, and our CO2 emissions are still continuing to increase. And the United States generates and uses more than most other countries for this. Even with all of that, though, there are reasons for hope. And as I was looking back over the last 50 years, yes, a lot of the environmental information is particularly challenging, but there are some areas that we've made some improvement in. And you might think of ozone, for example, was an environmental issue that was widely dealt with by the international community. Another example of that is hunger and poverty. There we go. That actually decreased from 36% to 9% in those same 50 years. Child mortality, these are the number of children that die under the age of 5, has decreased from 15% to 3.9%. And another remarkable statistic is the literacy. These are the number of people that can read. Literacy actually increased in the country, or in the world, I'm sorry, from 42% to 87% in those same 50 years. And just think about the literacy number for just a second. Think about what it takes to teach somebody to read. Think about the books, the teachers, the schools, the supplies, the training, all of the government policies necessary to put those things together. And just 50 years ago, only 42% of the population could read. Just 50 years later, 87%. When you do the math on the numbers, we actually end up with 5.3 billion people learn to read in the last 50 years. Tackling climate change is a similar scope of problem. And just like educating the planet, it took all of us sitting down, child by child, adult by adult, book by book, word by word, to learn all of those things. The path forward for climate change is the same. It's going to take all of us doing our part, literally being the hands and feet of improving the planet that we share on, or that we all share. So, one of the big ideas that we talked about as we were introducing the session was this idea that your biggest impact might just be the change that you inspire as churches, and also this idea that small changes sustained over time lead to huge impacts. To illustrate this, we actually put together a very simple tool. I'm going to just walk through this. I know this is small to read right now, so we're going to take a quick look at the parts of this. At the top of this spreadsheet, and we're sharing the spreadsheet with everybody, so you'll get a copy of this next week. At the top of this are just some quick averages. So for church operations, a small church might average 30 tons of CO2 a year, medium church 75, a large church 160. There's a lot of variance in church data, so your church could be anywhere in this range, but that's just a good starting place if you haven't done a full assessment. And then on the individual side, the US average for 2020 was 14 tons per person. And compared, just so you have some comparison data, the United Kingdom averages 5, France is down to 4, and Germany is at 7. So even though we've made some progress on the individual CO2 emissions level, there's still a long way that we can go. Then in the middle part of this is just a section on assumptions. And in here, we can plug in some of these numbers and play with them to get different outcomes. The green part actually shows what the impact of those changes look like over time. So let's take a quick example. We're going to look at just a church. If we zoom in here and look at the church operations, we'll assume that this church in this example is emitting 50 tons of CO2 a year. That's right in this area.
It's
And
about
we'll
a
assume that
small to medium size.
there's about a small to medium-sized church.
Mhm.
And we'll assume that they have a goal of reaching net zero in 10 years. So they're going to reduce their emissions by 100% in 10 years. To get there, they would have to reduce about 5 tons of CO2 a year. When we look at what the impact of that is, over 5 years, that 5 tons a year reduction turns into 75 tons of CO2 saved in the first 5 years, jumps all the way up to 275 tons over 10 years, and over 20 years, that is 775 tons. Now, a ton of CO2 emissions is hard to imagine. So if you imagine miles driven by a gas-powered car, that would be the equivalent of about 2 million miles there, or removing 155 gas-powered vehicles from the road. Now, that's a really good illustration of how those 50 tons of CO2 a year, if you can remove them, actually adds up to big changes over time. But let's compare that to the individuals. So we'll switch over to the individual side here real quick. If we just looked at using the average for the US of 14 tons per person, and if we set a modest goal, let's say we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 25% for individuals, and we're going to do things at church and along the way inspire change in our congregations, and maybe we can encourage 10 people a year to do that. Okay, so what would be a comparative impact of 10 people reducing their carbon footprint by 25% compared to a church going all the way to net zero? And when you look at this, you can see that now instead of 700 tons of savings over 20 years for a church, we're at 7,000 tons of savings for the individuals over that same time period. And that's actually 9 times the impact of the church. So we'll zoom out and just so you can see these compared. Instead of 2 million miles of gas-driven cars, we're actually saving 18 million miles of gas-driven cars. 155 comparatively. Yeah, so the really important thing here is the only way this is possible is if we are actually taking action, we're sustaining it over time, and we're encouraging people in groups to actually do this work. So this is not an either or thing. This is a both and. We want to encourage you to really think about how the changes that we make at church can inspire changes in our congregations and how those impacts can actually play out. So,
and this program, just want to add, this program from surveys of the past has shown us that getting to potentially individuals having a 25% reduction, whether that's 10 individuals having that or 50 individuals having that, a 25% reduction is very, very doable with
the stuff we cover in the program.
Stuff in the program, yes.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, we're going to move into our second discussion section, a second conversation group. And these are the questions. Becky, if you're going to put those in chat, thank you very much.
They are in chat already.
Excellent.
And thank you so much for that, Russ. And thank you for building that tool. It is super, super helpful to help us get our arms around things, especially as we progress into implementation after our breakout rooms. So we are going to head into the second of our breakout rooms.
We have about 10 minutes for breakout rooms. We're running a little bit slow tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and just give us 10 minutes.
And just keep an eye on that timer in the top right-hand corner of your breakout room. And then we will be back after that and hopefully get to share a takeaway or two.
Okay, great. Here we go.
Welcome back, everyone. I think most folks are back, but we will we will continue moving on as everyone is coming back. We had almost 100 folks in the first session earlier, or the first time earlier tonight. So there were folks coming in and out, and it worked out great. So we're doing great. Everyone's doing wonderful. Again, Russ, I want to check time. Do we have time to just maybe take one?
Time for maybe one or two shares. If anybody has anything that
Okay.
was significant or you'd love to share, we'd
Share? Yeah, just go ahead and put up a hand and unmute and go ahead and share. Does anyone have anything to share?
All right.
Christina, are
Oh,
you?
there we go.
around?
Rosalie, go ahead.
Oh, Rosalie, okay.
Thank you. I'll throw out a couple of ideas. Master gardeners, think about one garden at a time, we learned. And we mentioned victory gardens during the pandemics. What kind of effect, we wondered, did that have in helping to clean air? And I'm in Pasadena, California. We've got a local garden that had a regenerative landscaping workshop the other day.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Great ideas, and water saving and going to electric HVAC was an idea. So that's it. Thanks.
Ah, great.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Rosalie, thank you. That tees up session 7 very well.
Oh, absolutely. Keep those notes. Yes,
Absolutely.
we may ask some more sharing in session 7 on that. Absolutely. And
all right, I'm going to go ahead. Go ahead.
Christina, did you want to share just something that you've noticed?
So I had mentioned, based on question number 2, about where we've actually seen positive impacts. And I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in Southern California in the 70s and the 80s, in which the pollution, the smog problem there was probably like #1 in the world.
Yes.
And they adopted it. LA adopted an EPA rulings and sanctions and changed everything. And if you go to Southern California now, although I can't say there's no smog, the amount of smog is almost, well, for me, where I come from now, is almost minuscule. Where I moved to the Bay Area, and the Bay Area has a horrible smog problem.
Yeah.
And so just that adoption, that they made such an impact in changing our environment. So
Yeah, Christina, thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And I actually moved to Southern California in the early 80s, and I can remember the smog being so bad. Southern California is kind of a basin surrounded by mountains, for those of you that haven't been there. And I can remember never seeing the mountains. And if you go into Southern California today, it's really rare that you don't.
Yes.
It is a
Beautiful.
remarkable difference, just in our lifetime.
While it is hot, it is.
Yes, it is.
Today.
It is hot, and we will say that. So let me go ahead and share our screen, and we'll continue forward here.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And
that's really a great example, though, of sometimes those changes they develop slowly over time, and we don't necessarily notice them. But when you pause and you think back of how much things have actually changed just in 50 years, it's amazing. And I was thinking about the connections of I don't want to tangent, so we're going to stay on track.
So many good things, though. So
many good things. Thank you. If anybody has questions after the session, Becky,
Yes.
I'm going to actually.
Russ and I are going to be available after the session for further feedback and pondering, if you'd like. So we are going to move on to implementation, the ever so important implementation. We are going to talk in this first session. There's really 2 specific things we're going to encourage for implementation between now and the next session next month. And then each session will have its own implementation. These are 2 fairly simple ones. But number 1 is to understand your carbon footprint, the one for your church, church operations, if you don't know already, and understanding your individual carbon footprint. We are going to be giving you links at your fingertips to 2 different tools for both of those. The individual one will take you about 2 to 3 minutes, which is wonderful. And the church operations one will take you about 6 to 7 minutes. So if you don't know those already, those would be wonderful to do, because as we were just sharing, it's wonderful to know where we're starting from, to have a framework where we can get to. The second implementation is to invite more folks. We are going to keep registration open for the program until the next session, so that you have time to invite more folks to the program, because we want to walk alongside you and help you inspire as many more individuals as you can in your church, in your neighborhood, and to come alongside you in this. So both letting the church walk the talk. So I'm going to turn this over to Russ, and he's going to just do a quick case study of a fictional church to help illustrate some of the specific implementation.
Yeah, so this, thanks, Beck. We're going to talk about Hope Community Church. This is a fictional church, but we thought during implementation that wherever it makes sense, we want to actually give you a practical example of how you might implement this in your church. So we're going to quickly introduce Hope Community Church. They're a rural church with around 200 members. Everybody knows everybody. They love to gather and talk and share food and snacks and coffee and water. A few of the members are passionate about the environment, and they've recently formed a green team, which we see right there. In addition, they're part of a conference for their church that has set a goal for 100% carbon footprint reduction over the next 10 years. They're starting to share ideas. Someone found the Creation Care 101 program, and they decided to do this as a team. In their very first meeting, however, they got together and took a team picture. They're a creative group. And so this is the Creation Care team for Hope Community Church. So as a team, they decided to attend Creation Care 101. And after that, they got together and started asking this question, well, where are we starting from? If we have a goal as a church to reach net zero, we can't do that unless we actually know where we are. So one of the first steps for them was to actually do the church operations carbon footprint quiz. And inspired by this idea that they might be able to encourage other people in their congregation, they decided to take the individual footprint quiz as well. Sally on the Creation Care team loves crunching numbers. The team's thankful that she's there. And the whole team agreed to actually do the individual quiz. And then Sally agreed to pull them together. So Sally sat down first with the bookkeeper from the church, and together they went through doing this carbon footprint quiz for the church. They answered a few questions, filled out made some estimates on things. And at the end, the best summary that they could come to is that the church emits around 75 tons of CO2 per year. So that's their carbon footprint for the church operations. Comparing that to the individuals, they all agreed to go back through and do an individual carbon footprint quiz, which answers a few different questions. They click through, they answer all of the questions. And at the end, they found that if everybody lived like they did, they would need 4.2 Earths. And by clicking on these details, they can actually see their carbon footprint was around 11.8 for this person in the example. So Sally gathered all of that information from the green team and from some other people in their congregation, and they calculated just an average for the church. And they were surprised that the average came out a little bit higher than the national average at 17.2.
For the individuals?
For individuals. And this is tons of CO2 emitted per year per person. So taking those numbers, they went back to the comparison tool that we put together for the program. They dropped in all of their numbers, and they were surprised to see that just a 25% reduction in 10 people in their congregation would actually have 8 times the impact of taking their church all the way to net zero. So seeing this with their actual data, they were just really encouraged to find ways that as they do projects at church, to find ways to encourage people and use those projects as inspiration and jumping off points for people making changes at home. Thinking back over what they learned in this first session, they just, by working through the numbers, they saw that their biggest impact might actually be the change they inspire in others. That's not to say that the work to do in the church is not important, but the inspiration along the way is just as important. They're starting to recognize the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor being the same, that theme being repeated in all the teaching that we're doing. And this idea that small changes sustained over time, done by a group of people, lead to huge impacts. They're just encouraged that as we move through this program, we're going to actually talk about solutions that exist today that we can actually do. And this entire process is starting to give the team a sense of hope. So with that, thank you for spending some time with Hope Community Church. We're actually going to revisit them wherever it makes sense as we go through the programs, as we go through the various sessions of the program. And we'll turn this over and wrap things up for the night.
Yes. Thank you so much, Russ. It's so helpful to have the case study to move through each of the sessions with, to look at that. So we're going to just briefly go over next steps and reminders, and then we will close in prayer. So again, next steps, the carbon footprint quiz for the church. The church operations will take about 6 to 7 minutes, and the other carbon footprint quiz for the individuals to take about 2 to 3 minutes. You will have those at your fingertips early next week. And if for any reason you can't do the quiz, or somebody can't do the quiz, you've got the averages to look at as well.
Mm-hmm.
So also another next step is invite more folks. You have up until the next session, and anybody that you invite that registers, or you can go in if you want to register people and you have their names and emails, you can go in and register them as well. They will automatically get all the reminders and everything, and then they will automatically have access to the first session if they want to look at it or review it. And each session very much can stand on it alone, so they can just jump into the next session as well. So invite more folks. And then we are also sending you an outline next week for an optional, if you choose to have an implementation meeting with your team, just as a starting point that you can modify an meeting outline template to just go have an implementation meeting. Also, just 2 other reminders. Again, next week, you will have a session recording of this session that will start and stop for you wherever you want it to.
Right.
And then also resources, curated resources that are summarized in an email as well. So, and then October 13th is our next session 2, and it is on food and eating. It is a fascinating session, and we're really excited. Thank you all.